Classification. Right, okay. So, as I said, having finished this indifference curve analysis stuff, so now I want to get stuck into this whole notion of market structures. And it's just diagrams galore on this. Personally, it's my favourite. I would say it's my favourite of the whole year two. It's my whole favourite section of the year two microeconomics section of the specification. So let's move on. So that's tip-top progress to have done in a couple of lessons all the indifference curve analysis, budget lines, indifference curve diagrams, etc., etc. You, of course, need to be practising them so that when it comes to the exam, it's not a problem to redraw them. Okay, so let's take a new page, new heading. Market structures is what we're going to get stuck into today. Now, by market structures, what do we understand by that, Daniel?
Do you mean like perfect market or monopolies?
Absolutely correct. So you've identified for us the two most extreme cases of the spectrum of competition, really, where we have on the one extreme we have perfect markets, and on the other extreme we have the monopoly. But of course, we don't just go from excuse me. We don't just go from perfect markets to monopoly. What comes in between? Philip Titolovich.
Imperfect markets and oligopolies.
Imperfect. Okay. Well, imperfect markets. Would you not class monopoly as an imperfect market, Philip?
Yeah.
Indeed, would you not class anything which is not perfect market as an imperfect market?
Monopolistic markets.
Okay, monopolistic competition. You mentioned oligopoly. Sydney?
Is
Duopoly's one as well, absolutely. Tip top. And the final one? So we've got monopoly. I think we maybe identified them all there. Monopoly, perfect competition, oligopoly, monopolistic. Duopoly we don't look at so much, but it is one of them. Okay, so by market structures, we're talking about the spectrum of competition. Now that's nothing to do with Clive Sinclair, okay? Clive Sinclair. When I was a teenager, or maybe even younger actually, my next door neighbour, John and Martin Hennessy, they were one of the first people in the street to get a computer, and it was a BBC computer. And I used to go around every night after school and ask if I could play their computer games. And I did. And then Clive Sinclair brought out a computer, a personal home computer, so another one of the first home computers. Anyone know what it's called? Actually, he was on the BBC last week because they've been trying but failing to introduce a little sort of handheld digital console type thing. But the computer was called a ZX Spectrum, yes. So this is nothing to do with that. Right, okay. So on the spectrum of competition, we're talking perfect competition, and we're talking monopoly. So those are our two extremes. Now, which of those would you say, Sydney, is best for the consumer?
perfect competition.
Because?
Because
Why do you think that?
they'll be more likely to have lower prices and
More likely to have lower prices and
more options.
More choices. Okay, fair dues. So, perfect competition, you're thinking maybe lower prices, greater choice. Okay, and what springs to mind, Radhika, what springs to your mind when you think of Monopoly, Radhika?
High prices and not
You
much
think
choice.
high prices,
And then like not much choices, like
little to no alternatives, or we would call that, what do we call that in economics, where you've got one good and then here's another one which is very similar? Robert?
No substitute.
No substitutes, Radhika? No substitutes. Okay, but that sounds reasonable, Radhika. High prices, lack of choice. And Radhika, if I may just follow up on that particular one, what would you say with regard to profits in both?
would it be like high profits on the monopoly?
You would think higher profits on the monopoly side of things and lower on the perfectly competitive side. I would agree with that. And indeed, we'll introduce a new term here, but we'll say a little bit more about it when we get to the diagrams on it. So in Monopoly, the monopolist is said to make abnormal profit. Whereas the perfectly competitive firm is said to make normal profits. And we'll say, once you do the diagrams for these, I think it's easier to explain and understand what those terms mean. So, in between those things, you mentioned a few other market structures to my satisfaction. And so, Serena, could you then just place them? So we mentioned a few others. So we mentioned monopolistic competition, oligopoly. I guess you could put duopoly on it if you wanted.
Just go like on that side, duopoly.
Okay, so we could have duopoly here, yes. Okay.
And then the oligopoly and then the monopolistic competition.
So you say monopolistic competition here.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. There it is. Monopolistic competition. Now, there are two words there, very similar, but almost at opposite ends of the spectrum, if you will. Now, please don't do what one of your colleagues did. Please don't do what one of your colleagues did in the exam a couple of years ago, which was, the essay said something along the lines of, evaluate the extent to which monopolistic competition is beneficial to the consumer. And said candidate wrote an essay not about monopolistic but about monopoly. And you can imagine the consequences upon said candidate's marks. So you've got to be very careful on that one. Monopoly and monopolistic. Okay, and then Serena, you said in here?
Oligopoly.
Oligopoly. Okay, and for the benefit of those of us who don't know what those market structures mean, Nicole Smith, what do we mean by monopolistic?
There's like a large number of small firms in the market, so there's quite a lot of like choice of consumers.
Correct. So and could you give us an example of where you might see this in the high street? I'm going to one tomorrow as it happens.
Cafes or restaurants.
Okay, cafes and restaurants, yes, so they're all selling a similar product, which is slightly differentiated from one to the next, but they're all fairly similar. Okay, what else, Nicole? So cafe.
Supermarkets.
No, supermarket's too large. No. Daniel Coulson.
An example of an oli.
Monopolistic still. So Nicole said cafe, to which I agree. I'm going to one tomorrow. Snip, snip.
Or barbers.
The hairdresser. hairdressers than you do, Daniel. I used to go to the barbers, Daniel, but, you know, once you get a bit older, you prefer a bit more, you know, a bit better treatment when you get in your haircut, rather than, it's a bit of a conveyor belt in the barber shop, isn't it? Yes. So yes, hairdressers for me, Daniel. But hairdressers or barbers, that's a good example of monopolistically competitive firm, because they're all doing a similar thing, but they're slightly differentiated. So the one that I go to, as you can imagine, it's, you know, tip-top quality of service. Get in the barbers, they don't wash your hair in the barbers. Get your hair washed. And then as the lady's washing my hair, she says, "Oh, would you like the legs up on the chair thing? And then would you like the massage thing on your back?" And then takes you to your seat. Would you like a drink of any kind? Perhaps a quick game of pool before we start. Well, this honestly, my hairdresser, Tony the hairdresser, he's got. I highly recommend. He's got a pool table in the back of his premises. Great example of monopolistic. Estate agents, great example of monopolistic. So here, those small firms which are all doing a similar service, providing a similar service or good. Okay, oligopoly. What's that pitch for? What do you understand by oligopoly?
Is it where there's like a multitude of large firms?
There's a what of large firms, sorry?
Multitude.
You use a very large language there because this is on tape.
You can't see me on tape, so you don't know who it is.
But we can hear you. We can hear you. Oligopoly. There are a small number of
Large firms.
large firms, correct. For example,
Like fast food chains.
fast food chains, okay, yes. McDonald's, KFC, etc. Okay, yes.
Supermarket.
Supermarché. Although the supermarché one, the market's becoming more concentrated, isn't it? As Sasda, excuse me, Sainsbury's and Asda come together and merge and make the market more concentrated among fewer firms. Yes, Robert?
Oil companies.
Oil, obviously. When Sir Martin Cox was here, who's that, Dylan? The director of the John Locke Institute, to which Nathan there is going to the summer school. No, they can't see that he's not there. So Nathan is going to the John Locke summer school. Why have I mentioned that? I've lost my train of thought now. Oh yes. And when he was giving his first lecture of the day, of course, about game theory and so on, he talked about the oil industry.
Phone service providers.
Phone service providers, that's another one. Very good, Philip. Okay. And then lastly, duopoly. Duo, as its name suggests, Aaron. Excellent, yes. Two firms in the industry. Two firms dominating the industry. Yes.
Does it have to be only two firms, or is it just two very dominant firms?
Well, now you're sort of you're getting into that fine distinction between the textbook theory. You're getting into that textbook theory versus real life sort of scenario. So you're quite right. If it was, say, two firms with 40% each, and then maybe one other smaller firm, yeah, that's still very much a duopoly dominated by two firms. And as you know, in monopoly, in theory, it's 100% market share for one firm, but in reality, what percentage of the market share do you need to, quote unquote, have monopoly power? Burnett Field bad boys?
Over 50%.
No.
75%.
No. Nickel?
20%.
No, Nickel, no.
25.
20.
20. 25.
25, not 20, 25, yes. Spelling, punctuation and grammar, very important to us. Pronunciation. 25% or more. Okay. And then just one final thing on this before we get stuck into a few diagrams on it. The monopolist, because they are the only firm in the industry, certainly in theory anyway, what can they do to price? Nobody? Nobody? Philip?
They're price setters.
They are price setters, or, not red setters, they're the price, there's another term for it, so we would say that they are price, close, close.
Price maker.
Yes, thank you, that meets my satisfaction, thank you. So they are price makers. Whereas, how would you describe a firm in a perfectly competitive market? Kosa?
Price taken.
Price takers, exactly. Because in that scenario, you are a very small fish in a very large pond. And so you don't have any control over the price. You just have to accept the price which is determined by the rest of the marketplace. Which is why, one of the reasons ultimately why you don't make the significant profits that these people do. Okay, so having this start. Sorry everyone, the Burnhamfield bad boy is behaving. Okay. Having established that, now let us return, and I want you to rewind in your memories back to the law of diminishing returns, because you can't do these diagrams without your understanding of that, and also the price mechanism diagram. So there are two fundamentals to these diagrams which we're going to do. So let me just remind you, or you can remind me hopefully, of the firm's short-run cost curves diagram. Hopefully you all remember that. So a firm's short-run cost curves. Now you've only just finished your year one exams, so this should be really fresh in your memory bank, because this should have been part of your revision for that series of exams anyway. Got costs, output, and then we just need the curves on it. Would anybody like to come and put their curves on? Or are we all too shy? Too shy, I'm afraid. Charleston? No? Okay. Could you then, let's help me out here. So what shape are they?
There's two that go like that, and then one that comes through.
Is there two that go like that, and then one that goes through? It's for the benefit of the worldwide audience. Is there two that goes like that, and then one that cuts through? You could say it in 3 words, or 2 words even. Nicole?
The U-shape.
Thank you, Nicole. They are U-shaped, correct? So that's good to establish that from the outset. So they're U-shaped curves. Nicole, we'll not get into it here, but why are they U-shaped?
Because they reach like the minimum,
The minimum efficient scale, as was the question on your exam. But my question is that, so why do they curve upwards? So what effect?
marginal cost gets higher
Oh.
than the average goes
Okay,
up.
caused by diminishing returns.
Yeah.
So the diminishing returns is pushing the costs up. Okay. So I'll draw them for you, and I'm sure you can put the labels on them. So we've got this one. We've got this one, which is converging here. We've got this one, which is going through the minim. Oops, I could draw it. Art was never my forte at school. And there is one other, but for the purposes of all of these diagrams, you don't need it. Okay, so labels would be what, Robert? Top one?
MC?
No.
ATC?
Well done, Nicole. Yeah. ATC, yes. And then the next one, Radica. What do you reckon for the next one? AVC. Radica, that's Radica answering that one. AVC, yes. Where the curves are converging. And then we have this curve which is going through the midpoint of both of those. And that one is called the MC, which is
Marginal cost.
marginal cost. Okie dokie. So you'll remember those diagrams, yes? Okay. So keep those in your mind. And then the other thing to keep in your mind is, of course, the price mechanism diagram, or the market mechanism diagram. Ladies and gentlemen, you'll not believe this, but Johnston here is yawning. Now, in the perfectly competitive diagram, or sorry, market, what is it that allocates resources? So when you were thinking about a free market economy for your exam for the summer, what is it that allocates the resources in a free market economy?
Market forces.
Market forces, but the diagram is called
Market mechanism.
the price mechanism or the market mechanism diagram, correct. So all of this is arising because of things which are taking place in the either the price mechanism or the market mechanism. Okie dokie. So now, ladies and gentlemen, now we've established all that, it's taken a little bit of time, but now we've established all of that, we can now crack into the very first of the what I consider to be my favourite diagrams for micro, which is all of the diagrams for all of these market structures. I just love that to bits. And when I went on to tertiary level education, my favourite economics was always the micro side of things, because a lot of it built upon these diagrams. So, first we're going to look at perfect competition, and this is the long run equilibrium. When we've done the diagram, when we've drawn the diagram, you will see why this is referred to as the long run. So, the perfectly competitive firm can't make its own price. So it's a price, Dylan, taker. And Alex, who's it? So let's say you're operating in a perfect market. Who are you taking the price from?
The market price.
Exactly. Determined by the market
Forces.
demand and supply, or market forces. Okay. So we have to draw two diagrams here. So we do one for the industry, which is your market demand and your market supply. And then the one that we're most interested in is the one for the firm. So it's industry firm. Now you need to draw these adjacent to one another because things come off here and then we have to map them across to this diagram here. So sorry for not saying that at the outset. A few amends and rubbers and erasers being used now, ladies and gentlemen, in this moment of quiet.
Is it going to be
In this
writing?
moment of quiet.
Is it going to be writing?
Okay, so the first thing to do on the industry side of things is to draw on your market forces, or your market demand, and your market supply. So that's SM, market supply, DM, market demand. So that determines the equilibrium price. Now, that price is the price which every single firm in the perfectly competitive market has to accept, because they're such small tadpoles in a big pond that they cannot influence the price in any way. So, if the firm has to accept that price, what we then do is we dash across to the firm's axes, and we'll call this P star here. So P star is the price that the individual firm has to accept. And why do they have to accept it, Serena? Because they are price takers, correct. So you're a price taker, so take that. So take that.
So that sounded a little sarcastic.
So you're a price taker, so take that, says Gary Barlow. Don't know any take that songs. Shine, yeah, that one. Shine, let it shine. Hey, how you doing? You're all that matters to me. Shine. Right, okay. So, yes, price taker, accepting that particular price. Now, if you operate in a perfectly competitive market, the assumption is, in terms of the amount of goods that you can sell at P star, what is the assumption? So we looked at this earlier in the year. Robert?
But you can sell less than your supply.
No. Almost the exact opposite, actually. The assumption is that you can sell, because it's a perfect market,
All these parts.
you can sell as many goods as you want at that price. Now that has implications for the demand curve and the shape of the demand curve. So I'm going to start the demand curve here, but if I'm in a perfect market and the assumption is, well, I can sell as many goods as I want, and I'll give you a little clue here, ad infinitum, I can sell as many goods as I want, then the demand curve will be what shape? Aaron? Perfectly inelastic. But then if we do, so perfectly inelastic up from there?
No, elastic.
Perfectly elastic, correct. So the demand curve is perfectly elastic.